Hey everybody, Rob Thompson. I'm back relaunching the idea of the adjacent possible here. And I have the great honor of being here with Heather Smith from Talent Elevated. Hey Heather.
Hello, hello. Glad to
Oh,
be here.
glad to have you. Thank you for being back for this relaunch. So the adjacent possible deals with what is possible right now in our with our economic and time constraints. It's riffing on a biological framework that talked about in the beginning. There were a couple of atoms, and then over time they combined one set combined, and that expanded what was possible. And moving forward about 5 million years, I like to use this example when we're talking about what does the adjacent possible mean today in business and economics. I like to point out that the entire industrial world could have come to Charles Babbage's door, the father of the modern microprocessor as we know it. And we could have said, hey, we're here, we have seen the future, and we want to build this microprocessor with you. And I'd like to point out the entire industrial world as we know it today could not build a microprocessor, most likely in our lifetimes, back in the 1800s, because there were several orders of magnitude of technology that needed to be developed before you could print a microprocessor. The machine to print those microprocessors is like $360 million and requires a team of 12 highly trained specialists to make this happen. Da Vinci and the airplane. The modern airplane was not adjacently possible in his lifetime. We could have speed up that process with our knowledge. You could even take shoot a standard pen, and say, send me back to the 1800s and say, make this Sharpie pen. Couldn't do it. Couldn't. Again, we could speed up the process, but we couldn't develop that technology to the degree where we could machine a pen like this. What does all that mean? What Heather does is she expands the language of possible, therefore expanding the adjacent possible inside organizations. So all that said, Heather, tell me about Talent Elevated and yourself.
Absolutely.
What would you like everybody to know?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, my story is very much like the adjacent possible. Where I began did not end up to where I am now. And I wouldn't have known it if you would have told my 24-year-old self getting out of graduate school that I would own my own business and live where I live in Colorado and do the things that I get to do with executive teams and organizations on a day-to-day basis. So, Talent Elevated was birthed with the idea that we need to be able to help organizations make their workplaces a better place to work. The spirit behind that and the goal for that, for me, what makes me get excited about work every morning and want to get out of bed is that changes the dinner table conversation. So that's part of my passion. That's not necessarily what I'm talking to organizations about. What I mean by that is that if I can change the way that my work feels when I go to work every day, I talk about it over my dinner table with my teenagers and my husband. My teenagers may not care that much, but they're hearing mom talk about that was a better work day today. This went differently. I feel like the leadership team was approaching things in a different way, or man, I've been beating my head against the wall on this and it got easier. That changes things when we're out and about and we're having dinner with friends and we're having a conversation and we start talking about how work is different and that we can see ourselves in the vision and the mission of the organization and we're excited about being a part of something new. What happens? People at the dinner table or at the high top, if you're having a drink with somebody, you're like, I want that. Tell me more. The reason that's so phenomenal is because most of us don't experience it. Even if you think about your past experiences in work, you might not have had it. In my own experience, I worked in corporate healthcare for a very long time, and I saw phenomenal seasons of culture and seasons of culture that it wasn't even a priority or it wasn't talked about or it wasn't lived out by everyone. Maybe they said it was important, but then my experience in a work team wasn't as much. And so we know how fragile it can be, but we also know, and the work that I do says we can be intentional about it. We can create intentional cultures that drive business outcomes. We can create teams that actually work effectively together. Will they have perfect communication? No. Will everybody be accountable all the time? No. But we can put some intentional infrastructure and systems and expectations in place. Processes is what I mean by systems that really help people to live out the dream of their job, that it's easier, it's better, they can be more creative and innovative. So that's what I do. And I think part of the possible there is that we don't know what our company could be if we actually had a culture that was helping to drive the strategy that we had. So what might it take for us to think about that differently and vision a different future?
Ooh, there's so much to unpack there. from the word beginning. So sitting down at the kitchen table with your family, right? And a bad boss exponentially increases the stress on an individual and by extension potentially their household, right, depending on how the individual holds it, all the way up to the cultural. I've heard, I'm not maybe in Japan, folks often introduce themselves as part of the collective company, like I am so and so of Samsung, right? That kind of thing is alien to a lot of U.S. business cultures, right? Like I wouldn't necessarily. I used to work for T-Mobile. I wouldn't not love you, T-Mobile, but I wouldn't necessarily have said I'm Rob of T-Mobile, right? That's not how we approach that here. Is that even possible in the United States to develop that kind of culture in a business?
I think one of the things that you're talking about in that mindset, I am of this group. So you identify it so deeply that you feel proud to say, I'm of this family group. I am of this civic group, excuse me. I am of this organization. So what that tells me is that there is a desire for and a pride in people claiming and having connection in the group that they're a part of. Is that possible? Absolutely. Part of what is so difficult for people, if you think about even in small businesses, if you're a CEO and you have 3 employees, and so you're trying to make this happen. I would argue that it's a similar challenge with 300 or 3,000 employees, because the things that you're thinking about on a day-to-day basis as a CEO is wildly different than what the worker that's at the front line with their customer or with the vendor or with the client or patient, that they are thinking about what they need and how they contribute so differently. So much of what the challenge is that our senior leaders don't know how to communicate how to be of, because they get excited of being of at that top level. Really complex problems, systems thinking as a small business owner trying to grow, trying to be all the hats that they need to be. And then, for instance, if I run an electricity company and I have an electrician, that's not what they're thinking about on a day-to-day basis. To be of talent elevated electricity, let's say, is very different at the electrician level than the scheduler level, than the CEO level or the founder level. Fast forward to when that company grows to 300 employees, you have a lot more layers of people to understand what it means to be of a company. And so some of this is in the tactical way you communicate. Some of this is in the way that you educate around your future vision and how people's roles contribute to that. But your direct question was, is it possible? It is hands down possible, but the choice is intentionality. If you just allow kind of the things that happen, you focus in on the fire of the day or the thing that's, kind of hitting you in the face, is that going to happen organically? I would say absolutely not.
It'd be one, and it'd be a unicorn for it to happen
Yeah.
organically. I mean, even in the military, which we as we come up through the military, we're taught these things, and you are of the military, right? You are of the Air Force. 15 years ago, I was a Thunderbird. Let me think here, 2020, 19 years ago, I was in the Thunderbird. I still wear the T-shirt. I was of the Thunderbirds, right? But that intent, you're absolutely right. Intentionality and intentional language. I run a large social media group here locally, and I use very intentional language when speaking to my teammates in that effort, right? And they're part of the team. We have philosophical discussions about the nature of what we're even building. It's not just a thing, right? It is where we are of. In fact, often the group is the 411, and often I'll say, hey, Rob of the 411. Very intentional language and I share that with them too. To that intentional language matters so much, and I've been thinking about that framework, intentionality framework, a lot today and recently too. Is how do we? What does that even mean? So you're a CEO of a company that's got 300 people. What kind of intentionality? What's an example of intentional words that someone might use in intentional action?
Yeah. So part of the intentionality is driven by where you're wanting to go. So the very first part of before you even get to the answer to your question, is intentional towards what? Is
Good
it
point.
to whom most of the CEOs I work with, they're saying, hey, I'm being really intentional to the strategic plan. I've got to grow my business. We've got to capture this part of the market. We have to grow this service line. We have to think differently about how we've been doing business for 75 years, and we have to completely shift the way that we show up in the market. That's what they're focused on. Not wrong. But part of the additional focus that we want to help them to get after, that's this intentional piece, is so, I mean, this is a sort of a rote question, or something that you could just really think about, like, well, how are you going to get there? Well, through employees, right? So if I have 300 employees, that's going to take every single one of those to get to this vision and dream. And I know that sort of, existentially, but I don't really think about what that is in my day-to-day work. That's where we start to get to that intentional language. So if I can put those two pieces together to say, I need to change the way that we show up in the market, who's going to help me do that? These incredible 300 people. I can't list 300 names that I know personally, right? Like, to hold the concept of 300 individuals and their purposeful connection to that vision is really hard for one person. So
Yep.
then I've got to be thoughtful about, how does my language cascade to everyone?
Yep.
How do I help to inspire and motivate at different levels? Where do I show up at the front line and talk to the one person that could influence the 5 around them? Where do I, infiltrate a group of senior leaders or supervisors, and they then impact? So the intentional language is the part of it is where you're going, and then to talk about where you're going in a way that matters to me, not to you. You're there inspired because you're the CEO and you're rallying the troops and doing all the things. Lovely. But if you talk about it in your version and your terms, it doesn't impact me. So the intentional language is really trying to, one, understand who your folks are and what they're doing. So in the example of the Thunderbirds, right? Like, every person has a different role, I imagine, to make that incredible thing happen. I've witnessed it, and it's just like mind blowing that those things can occur. But there's somebody that's like turning a wrench to make sure that something is safely put together. They have to understand how they're contributing to that person in the air, and how what we did, the Thunderbirds 20 years ago, is different than the challenges that we have in front of us in the next 10 years. And so to be able to articulate that is a huge challenge for CEOs, because they often don't think about that at every level of the organization. But to have a desire to want to be able to articulate it in that way and bring people along, so much of that is just the inspiration, kind of the pull to get, when I'm turning a wrench, I'm like, hey, I'm making such a difference and such an impact, and I'm keeping this individual who I know and care about, or maybe even I don't know that well, I'm keeping them safe. So when people compare that, then the acceleration towards that vision and business goal just starts to happen organically. And that's what we want to see. We want to put culture and business acceleration together, because that's what makes everybody's lives easier, and frankly changes the dinner table conversation in a pretty profound way.
It does. I think to organizations I've been in, both military and civilian, and I mean, I think you nailed it with the of. If you are Heather of Talent Elevated, as opposed to I work for, or it just changes. Language changes everything. The way we sit changes things, right? The way your posture, right? The food you eat. These are so by extension, these are things that we ought to be thinking about in business too. How language, intentionality, language matters. Think if you're at the top of that organization, put yourself in the perspective. I would submit it's your obligation as the leader of that organization to put yourself in the perspective of the mechanic, for example, and you can't expect that in reverse unless you've earned that respect from that person. I can think. I watched one time a pilot over-G a jet. That means they well, I didn't watch it when they landed. They jumped out of the jet and they said to the mechanic, "Hey, I just over-G'd the jet, haha," or "I just over-G'd my jet, ha 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 ha." What he just told that pilot or that mechanic in that moment was, you have an 8-hour inspection ahead of you, climbing through this machine with a bunny suit in a 100-degree weather, looking for millimeter-sized cracks in the airframe, and also called it my jet. I also watched a lieutenant once jump out of a jet and say, "Oh man, I am so sorry. I over-G'd your jet. What can I do to help?" And the mechanic in the first instance, kept his military bearing, but you could clearly see he was fuming. In the second instance, the mechanic was like, shoot, nothing, sir. I'll take care of it. And the LT said, baloney. Got on the radio and said, he didn't say baloney, by the way, but he got on the radio and he said, called in and he said to the commander, "Hey, sir, I'm going to miss debrief. I got to help with this inspection." Got the guy water and pizza, and because he couldn't he didn't know how to work on the jet, but he could be there and be supportive. And I have empirical, direct knowledge that lieutenant did not miss a sortie going forward on that mission we were on. He always got to fly, well, because his team took care of him. More to the point, I used to have a commander, and I tell the story occasionally, but one day she came into my cubicle, or my office. I had 4 or 5 guys that worked for me, and I like to make the joke that her hair was on fire, but she's usually very calm and cool and collected. She said, "Rob, I need this done." I said, "Got it, ma'am." And she said, "Thank you." And she outlined the task and said, "Let me know when it's done." And she took off. And I turned to my guys, and my second in charge, he said, before I could even say the word, I was like, "So," and he goes, "No, not our job." And I said, "It is now." And long story short, we did the task. I actually had him lead the task. After we were done, I said, "Now guess what? You get to present it to the commander." And we walked down the hall and reported into her office. And I said, "Ma'am, so-and-so led this task. He did a great job, and he's going to brief you on the results." And after he did that, she said, "Thank you guys so much." And I said, "Did you need anything more?" And she said, "No." And we turned to leave, and she said, "Wait, can I ask you a question?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Why did you not ask why?" She said, "That's not. It's not your job. You didn't even ask why." I said, "Ma'am, I know that you know that. I trust you know that, and so therefore I trust that if you asked me to do it, there was a darn good reason, and I'm going to deliver. We're going to deliver." And she said, "You'll never know how much that means to me." And I said, I have an inkling, but got it." And so walking back to my office, I asked my second in charge guy, I said, "Hey, now do you see?" And he was like, "No, no, no, no." And I was like, you do see." And then he called me a couple of years later, and he's like, "I see it now." I'm like, but it took a while, but yeah, it's that culture. We knew that our commander had our back, right? That we knew that the boss had our back in the Thunderbirds. And I know Major, now Colonel Nicole Malachowski from the Thunderbirds, and she is a lot like you, actually, where just she's got your back, and as the boss, that's going to have ripple effects, I used to call it, through the organization, because you're going to do things for them that you just, they don't even need to ask, or they just hint that you're going to do it, and you'll do it for them. And I that was an extremely long monologue. I apologize. I just get passionate about this stuff too.
It makes me think of one kind of approach to that is we don't necessarily build businesses. We build people. We pour into people that build great businesses. There's probably some better, more articulate quote on that. But I really think that it's where your mindset is. I know that I'm limited of what I can actually do and produce to help these incredible companies that we get the chance to work with all over the country. But I am going to run out of time at some point in my day. And so some of that is a constraint of just the time. Some of that also is there's different challenges that we walk into businesses with that I haven't encountered before. And I have these incredible team members who are like, "Hey, I've been through that," or "I've been in that kind of industry," or "Let me walk through it this way." So if I can shift my mindset to say, how do I pour into my people because I know that they will build this incredible business to my vision? They're not just like kind of all going different directions. So it does have intentionality, but I think there's a really important lesson there that I think it doesn't feel instinctive to a lot of people, right? We're like, "No, I've got to work on the business," and like, "You just get over here and do your job." Or I can be really nice to you, but say like, "Now get your job done." I think part of it is a very different mentality of that servant leadership approach of how do I build such a trust in you that not only did you get that done in your example, but you did it efficiently, you empowered another team member, you role modeled what that might mean for him and his longer term career, right? So that for that one task, I don't know how long it took you guys to do that, but for that one task, the ability for that to cascade because you're focused on the people, both up to her as well as the people that were working with you, made such a difference. And so that is when we really think about systemic change, which is what we want, right? We don't want a flash in the pan culture change where it's like, "Oh, well, for this goal, woo, culture," and then whammo, it's right back to where it was before, and everybody was done putting on the kind of the face. They want to have that systemic change because you think about if they don't, in their mind, the way they're working on a day-to-day basis, they have a little bit, it's almost like a little buzz that they're just like, "Well, but what about, I've got to keep an eye on, this might all fall apart, or that person might scream and yell, or I don't think that they're going to include me, or I really don't feel safe with this person." And that is taking up brain space. So if we just looked at a graph, if we were to say like, what's occupying your brain that actually is not helping you in this incredible job that we want you to do and be innovative and creative and collaborative and all this stuff. If your frontal lobe is really clouded with kind of worrying about culture, then we're actually not getting the best return on investment from our employees. We're not giving them the opportunity to contribute to something greater than themselves in a really incredible way. And most people are used to that. So that's the norm. So we have to be a little disruptive to help people get out of, hey, in this culture, we're intentional and we're trying to develop this. We're not going to be perfect, but we don't have this as a part of our culture. And if you see this, we want you to say something. We're going to work on it together. We're not going to go, slap hands and get somebody, kind of on the naughty list. We're going to help change and modify and evolve that. And that people are like, what? Tell me more, right? It isn't, to your second, that wasn't something that was likely an immediate reaction because it's so foreign to him. He had to see that it got a very different outcome longer term to build that understanding.
That's a great point. That and it goes to, sometimes I nerd out on some things, like even the concept of the adjacent possible, right? Like you have to step back and you can see when you talk about some of these things, you have to remember that the foundation has to be built first. Trust at its core. You have to trust. I'm reminded, I used to run the ropes course at the academy and here in Colorado Springs, and the trust fall. Something as simple as that trust fall, right? We had a 6-foot platform on a tree, and we had a little ladder we could climb up next to the member. And I'm reminded of a story once where this young lady climbed up on the trust fall 6 feet, and there was a very formal process that we ran people through of how to catch. There's 6 people at a minimum, 8 is optimal to catch somebody when they fall as a plank off of this platform. And I got up there, and usually when people were doing this exercise, they were generally good. But this young lady, she got up there and she was shaking like a leaf, right? Like every molecule in her body was vibrating. And when that happened, I would get up there, I'd climb up alongside it or something of that nature, and I would say to her, or the person, I'd say, "Hey, we got you," right? So I did that this time, and I climbed up there and I made eye contact with her. And I said, "Your team has you. We have you," right? And she locked up, like stopped everything. It was the cleanest lockup I've ever had out there, right? She just instantly, she took my word for it, and she went stiff as a board. And in my head, I was like, "Don't look away, don't break eye contact." And then I was also like, "Please catch her, please catch her, please catch her," right? But instead, I projected confidence and I nodded, and she fell, and her team caught her, and it was a perfect execution. But for me, that's the foundation of it all, is trust. If your team doesn't trust you, if you don't trust your team, none of this matters, right? It's just not. It's going to be insincere, or it's going to be perceived as insincere. Would you agree or disagree that trust is foundational?
Oh, absolutely. I can tell you multiple clients that we're working with right now. This is at the root of some of the different challenges that they're having across their executive teams primarily. I don't mean just executive teams have trust challenges. I just mean that that's a lot of the place that it's rooted, that is making an organization have inability to be able to move forward. And one of the things that's fascinating about trust is that the way I define it and the way you define it is different. We all
Good point.
know that
Yep.
to build it takes a lot of effort and to break it takes just a minute. And so it's this fragile thing that we are like trying to build, and we know it's really important, but I don't know how to do that. Most of the time people are like, I don't have a clue. So there's a lot of different things that are out there that help us to break down, like, what are the steps towards trust. Brene Brown has an acronym called BRAVING that I love. That it's a lot of different things in it, but it starts to make it a little more tangible. So what's fascinating is, why don't we build trust? Right? So that's part of it, right? So because we all want it. So it's not like something that we're like, oh, you want that? Like, I didn't really think about that today. No, I want that. You want it. But the challenge is that the way that we focus on and operate and work is, it is about this, like, perform, 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 be productive, be productive. And yet we're very unproductive, and our performance is tainted by the lack of trust. Even if you and I have a good respect for one another, but we don't have a deep inherent trust, we're going to operate differently. We're not going to share ideas in the same way. I'm going to follow you around basically and make sure you're doing the things that I want you to do, because I'm going to waste my time doing that where I might be better served elsewhere. And so one of the things I think that's interesting is the intentionality, like you're talking about the root. The possible starts to grow when we pay attention to what's the root, and we think about, like, well, what are we trying to impact? It's the same. I think from here to there, I can get excited about there, but I know that it's not a straight line. I think we act like it's a straight line, and we get irritated that things don't happen really easily along the way when it's full of people and full of change and full of, unexpected twists and turns. But the possible, we gain our footing a little bit, right? The example that she was able to get Okay, she didn't just immediately fall. The first thing that she did was she was able to get prepped. So
Hmm.
she stopped the shaking, right? That was her one step towards what was possible. Then she's locking eyes with you. She's sort of stealing some hope and a good perspective that you have, right? Some confidence that you have. So that maybe was her next in the microsecond
Complete.
before she looked. Maybe she made eye contact with her best friend down there and was like,
Nope.
I don't know.
Nope. She just
Nope. She
fell.
just
She
straight at
just
you. So
yeah.
she was
Straight at
like
me.
one,
Didn't like
two, and then three, right? But
gone.
it
Yep.
took
Yep.
her those steps to be able to move into what was possible that she would have said 30 seconds before wasn't. So I think we need to think about that. We do that every single day, and we do it all throughout our day. But when we really can break down some of these really complex problems in business and start to see it in those micro steps, possible becomes a reality.
Two thoughts there. You're right. In her trust, probably, for this is the first time I've unpacked it like this with someone. The trust probably rolls back a couple layers too. She was present for the training. The 5 minutes prior, where we have this thing where we have them stand. We model the posture, and we have the whole description of the activity. And so there's a trust layer being built in that moment. She had to believe up there on that platform, and I can't believe I've used this example dozens of times and I never thought about this, but she had to believe in the training that I gave that was the correct thing. She had to believe her team was going to execute that training correctly, and those layers. You mentioned the trust thing too. So there's a layer there too. Trust can be destroyed in an instant. But for example, the commander or any number of great bosses that I have known, if they make a mistake, because you have trust, or if and when they make mistakes, because everybody makes mistakes, you automatically prescribe. Like if that commander, if she'd made a mistake, I would have. Well, that's clearly outside her behavior, and I trust that that's an anomaly, and I trust that there had to be some. There's a trust layer that exists there, which they have grace. You get if you once you've earned that trust. I remember one time us same commander and another enlisted folks were mentioned that they didn't like her very much, and I was like, well, that's weird. How could you not like that commander, right? And then he said, well, one day she yelled at me, and knowing this person and knowing the commander, I was like, I bet she had a pretty darn good reason. And he's like, well, I don't know. And I was like, knowing your job. And he was a cable guy. So in the Air Force, cable guys go down into the holes and they pull cable and fiber and stuff like that. I was like, you went down a hole without proper ventilation, didn't you? And just I was able to extrapolate all of that. And he's like, well, yeah. I was like, you could have died, and that's why she yelled at you. But I just knew just the very thing of saying I don't like her triggered something, a defense in me for her, even though this guy was my friend. But I knew him and I knew her and I knew there. And anyway, rambling, except to say there's a grace that trust extends. That even if you don't necessarily want to spend all this time, it's critical because there's that grace layer that exists too, and that it can be destroyed in an instant. But your team will give you grace if you've built that trust up.
The best way I've ever heard that described is I used to teach 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That's Stephen Covey, long time
Mm-hmm.
ago in the corporate setting. And he talks about it as an emotional bank account. And so it was a really good
Yep.
visual for me, right? That we're putting trust is built in small moments. So we're putting little deposits in. And so if my bank account with you is pretty high, and then you have a withdrawal, you have a moment of breaking trust, you have a mistake, you yell or you're unkind or aren't thoughtful or whatever, I still am probably gonna have an emotional reaction like, ooh, like that didn't feel good. But because of this emotional bank account, I do think about, or I have the opportunity to think about, does that really match what I know about Rob? Or I might come back to you and say, hey, are you okay? I might have more compassion. I might have more empathy. Like I might have a very different response. I think that the trust is broken in small moments is when your emotional bank account's very low. So
I
if
like
I've
that a
just
lot.
met you and we haven't had any interactions, or maybe we're on a team together, but we have no connection and we're not intentionally building in those small deposits, then you do set you do yell at me, or you don't follow through on something, or I'm vulnerable and you act pretty harshly, or you just sort of shut me down. Immediately, I have a wall up. And so I think, and then that wall often takes a lot more deposits to break down and to restart and such. But I think I love the mentality of that, because I can really think about, hey, what am I doing in this moment to build trust? So if I'm in a team meeting with you and we're supposed to partner on a project, I could sit there and coach you and say, like, how could you build trust with Heather? Not not because it's broken, or not because, but don't you want to have a good emotional bank account with your team members? Because like you said, you're probably going to mess something up in the future. And wouldn't it be
It's
better
okay.
for that relationship? So what would a small moment of trust? People usually can get around that. They're like, oh, well, I could, again, the breathing one, this, the R is reliability.
Mhm.
If I tell Heather I'm going to follow up with something, I'm going to send it to her by Friday. I'm going to send it to her by Friday. Fabulous. If Heather's vulnerable with me, how do I receive that? Do I have to be vulnerable with her? Not necessarily. If I can choose to be vulnerable with her, will it help? Yes. So like it's just these choices and intentional steps forward, because not to manipulate or go, well, now I've got a bank account, I can use it, but it really does help and change the way that we operate in organizations and in teams.
Agreed. I like too the idea of breaking it up when you talk about those small intentional moments. If you shift, if you're thinking, task accomplishment, task accomplishment, task accomplishment, that it goes back to language, right? But if your question is a micro question, right? Then you're going to look for those moments of trust. In my other role as the 411 with that group, I don't think about it in terms of, well, today we processed 16,322, requests for services, right? It's system building, right? I wake up and I say, here's our ecosystem. How can this ecosystem help today, right? And because of the shift in language and the shift of the question, right? It's not how can I generate more leads for business today. It's how can the ecosystem show up today, right? I have two questions on my board, and one of them is how will the 411 show up today, or how will Rob show up today, and the other one is what am I on my way to do. And neither is make $1 million, right? That's not that. Even that, if that was the phrasing of the question, that would be a much very different moment to moment. I would be looking for those, how can I exploit this moment for maximum gain? Instead, how do I show up? How am I going to show up today? Automatically instills a sense of those micro questions you're talking about, how do I do this today? How do I show up? How do I want to show up to the community? My kids, my wife, who just popped in for a second.
And I think part of that is that visioning of where you want to go. So when I coach leaders, one of the first things that we do is I say, I want you to think about what's your 1-year leadership vision. And this isn't about what your boss wants you to be or what your team needs you to be, or maybe a little bit of what your team needs you to be, but what do you want to be for your team? What kind of leader do you want to be? What's fascinating about this is that the vision is, I do it at a year on purpose, because if I say 3 months or 6 months, you make it really small. If I say your leadership vision, this big, long, broad thing, then it's going to be something that is lofty. I want to be the best leader who everyone trusts, and it's all this like amorphic stuff that I can't put my arms around. But I think I'll ask, what does your role look like today? What does the organization need you to be in a year? And then what do you want to be known for amongst your team? What do you want to be known for amongst other leaders? So people will put all these different things down. And that's part of, how do I want to show up in this moment? I'll coach them. Think about your leadership vision. I want to be more present with people. Okay. As you're walking in, based on what's going on this week, how are you more present? What does that look like? So those are some different things that I think are important as we're thinking about the micro steps forward.
I would agree with that. Okay, so it's situational leadership. I've heard a lot of people say it's my way or the highway, but what I'm hearing you say is that doesn't actually work.
Yeah, I was talking about the concept of flexing. So a long time ago, I used to teach the DISC communication style. So the dominant, influencer, stable, and conscientious, I think. And so what was really interesting about that is that people would ask, so if I'm a D, if I'm a driver, that was driver, not dominant. If I'm a driver and I'm hanging out with somebody who's an influencer, should I adapt to their influencer style? So we talked about flexing a lot, because the message wasn't that you should just completely abandon who you are, and because you're this way, I'm going to focus in on this way, right? Like that doesn't feel true to that 1-year leadership vision. How do you grow if I'm just constantly pivoting for you and then I'm pivoting for you? So I think that you want to be thoughtful about the situation you're in, the people that you're working with, and the aim that you're after. So let's use the example of present. So I might be present in a very different way with this person than this person. What does it feel like for them to receive me as a present person? I might need to listen to you. I might need to actually walk alongside Joe over here and be in the problem with him and help solve the problem. If I did that for you, you would be like, get out of my space, right? Like that is not what I need. So part of that is assessing where you need to flex. And part of that, to be honest, is asking, what do you need from me? Or I think that what you need me to be is this, or my role you need me to play is this. Is that what the best way I can, help partner with you? Often I'll find that the things I think people need me to do is way, way, way less than or what I think is way more than what they actually need. They're like, no, I just need you to listen. Hey, could you just make this one phone call? Could you do this one thing? Right? They want to own it. They're not trying to throw the monkey on my back, but they're struggling to try and figure out how to move forward. And so I think being really open to hear and listen about that is critical.
I like that a lot, and I like the idea of flexing and flexing is not changing who you are. It's holding space for uh, around that. Or the analogy as you were describing that in my head is when I learned to dive. Uh, we had a guideline, right? And the guideline was there for you to hold on to, and circle around, but you could always reach and grab the guideline. Except one time I got caught in the current and lost the guideline. But another story, another time. Flexing around, I like that a lot, and holding the space. One of the things I do for our social media stuff is I like to say we hold space for the squishiness of humans. We have an operating principle, but we hold space, and people are, as much as I love tech too, humans are not computationally irreducible. That's one of my favorite sayings is they're squishy. So hold space and some squishiness for and also if you're too inflexible, if you're too rigid, you will break. Your system will
Mhm.
break. Your processes will break.
I
Uh,
think that's what I find a lot of people that are at these advanced levels, and I'm in my 40s too, so as they're advancing in age, what they've been doing that's taken all this hustle and strive and go and grit has gotten them, yes, to where they are, but it's also really depleted them in terms of energy and maybe even physically, and it's just like, I can't do this anymore. So, I don't know that if I told my 24-year-old self to do things differently, that she would have listened. She probably would have been like, hey, old lady, get out of there. Like, I don't have any time for you. I'm going to go, like, I'm going to strive, strive, strive. But what I do think is fascinating is that part of this, that my favorite word that I'm coaching leaders on right now is curious. So this presence, this understanding of who I'm talking to, what do they need? Who do I want to show up as? Now, to be curious, I can't be racing to the next thing. I can't be after the agenda and the agenda only, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that I need to sit with you and we chill and we have hours of conversation. But if I walk in with curiosity, I have to believe that that's going to help me be able to accomplish the goal and for you to be a part of that goal in a very different way than if I just come in and either like drag you out of your seat and we're headed this direction. But curious, I think, is it's one of my favorite words because it invokes in me um, I don't know what the answer is, right? It's like Sherlock Holmesy, right? Like he doesn't know exactly where he's after and how he's going to put all the puzzle pieces together. It also is a space that says I have to sit in your story. I can't just sit in my story because I don't know. I am curious. It also brings me to a place of humility because if I'm curious and I'm acknowledging that I don't have the answers, that feels a lot better. And you usually can enter in with me differently if I'm having the posture of humility as we're beginning, a project together, or we're trying to get to know one another, or whatever the task at hand may be.
Well, people love to share if you're curious, and if you were to ask me a data analysis question, I probably would not be able to stop myself from expanding upon the virtues of Python for data analysis, right? Because we want to share what we know, and also this is the highest and best use of your time, right? We've had some tech questions. It's not the highest and best use of your time to to build, I don't know, automations inside a CRM, right? But if you ask, here I'm doing it, I'm going down the nerd rabbit hole. But people are curious and they want to know. And if you express that curiosity, especially as a leader, they're gonna naturally want to tell you what they're doing and show you what they're doing for your organization. And
You
it
can
honors them too. It honors their knowledge.
you can also, in the spirit of being curious, I can invoke curiosity within you. So if we're talking about these automations within the CRM that I don't fully understand, you understand all the back end pieces. So I listen and hear some of the different things you're excited about. And then I can say, hey, Rob, how do you move that forward towards this goal that we've been talking about as a team? So I'm curious, but I'm also helping you to say, or what are you curious about as you look at this goal based on what you know? So now we're headed in a similar direction, but it's definitely different than like, hey, what are you doing right now? What's your next task? I've got all the answers. You do this, you do this. If I told you how to do automations in a CRM, you would laugh at me because my task list would look really ridiculous because I don't know what I'm doing. So I think it invites expertise, it invites partnership. And even at frontline, Gen Z in the workplace, I think it's trying to be curious about what do they bring to the table, even if that's just a fresh perspective. One of my favorite things that we used to do in the hospital system I worked in with employees is we would just call them fresh eyes, and we would bring them in on a Lean Six Sigma project that we'd be working on, and all these people had worked and been a nurse for 25 years, and this person had been taking care of patients this way, and we'd say, hey, can you just come in and be fresh eyes? And when they talked, we listened. We were like so curious because they would ask questions that really seemed like, hey, Captain Obvious here, like, is this? But we were like, oh man, we missed that. Tell us more. Why did you come up with that?
Well, from a systems design theory, they grew up in a completely different world, right? If I were to talk to my 15-year-old, 14-year-old standing over there and say, hey, do you remember the days of the handshakes of modems? Literally no frame of reference, right? They
Yeah.
they don't know what you're saying. Same thing though, in this TikTok world of information, we exist in different models. So if as a business owner, if you want, if you stay in that rigidity of your time frame, even you're missing out on communication mediums, on like it or not, a lot of people get news from their TikTok. That's a news distribution medium for a lot of people. And for, somebody else might say that's not vetted information, and so therefore unreliable, and dismiss it entirely. But it is a communication medium, and it is moving people, and so therefore it's valid. So to your point of staying curious and holding space, you have to be to stay relevant.
I think that you don't get tossed to and fro in the midst of this though, right?
Right.
So I could say to a Gen Zer, let's just say there's a reason that I need them to take some things that are going on in the media and distill it and communicate to my company, let's say. And their avenue of getting that is TikTok. So part of what I could say is, hey, this is the outcome that I want. Here's how I would go about it. How would you go about it? And then I might say, okay, if you go about it that way, I have a concern that that's vetted, that it comes from a reliable source. So how could you do that? How could you use your sources and figure out a way to filter it so it's vetted before we build this communication? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what they might use, how they might approach that, what others are doing with that piece. But I'm able to at least give the rubric and the framework that says, this is my goal. Here's one idea of how I would approach it. I'm very open to yours, but these are the constraints or these are the parameters of success that I think are important. How might you solve for that? Gosh, that gives them so much agency. They have so many different ways that they can approach that. And then I have already set the expectation for accountability. So they bring that back to me and I say, how do you know this piece has been verified? Can you show me that? Not in a micromanagey way, but like, I want to learn. How did you get that? It's also an accountability that you can show me your work, right? You can make that available. And so I do think that there's not this just like release because you work differently than I do, or you don't think that it's you're like, oh, I can't work with them, I can't understand them. It is about that we're headed towards this vision, towards this outcome, but we're trying to bring people along with us.
That makes sense. Another thought on the rigidity. If you aren't curious as the boss, then you're shutting down pathways, right? Last military story here, and I want to honor your time. I was observing an exercise one time. In the military, we exercise a lot, right? And I was the lowest ranking of 4 people standing there observing this exercise. And long story short, that wasn't going well. The systems that we were trying to, the scenario was we were our command post got blown up, and we had to set up an on-the-fly command post in a parking lot to continue the operations. Well, the truck kept blowing fuses because they were hooking up to the battery. Long story short, I watched them blow 3 or 4 fuses, and being an electronics guy, I was like, this is weird. And I turned to the major who was standing next to me, and I said, sir, how come CE, the civil engineers, don't bring a generator? This is a base-wide exercise. Why don't we also have CE roll out with a generator when this happens? And he looked at me and he's like, that's a very good question. And he turned to the person standing next to him, who happened to be the vice wing commander, so in charge of 4,000 people, and said, Colonel, why don't CE bring a generator? And the colonel looked down the row at me, and he's like, that's a very good question. He turned to the general who was standing next to him, and this is the coolest implement in 20 years. I never had an idea of flow this fast, and so linearly, right? But literally, the general had been listening, and he said, that's a very good question, Colonel. And he said, why did it take him, and all these exercises, and he didn't mean it in a negative way. He's just like, why is the low man on the totem pole here the only one asking that question? Good on you, he said. And he said, make it happen next time. And from that on, the general, we rolled out with a generator. But I felt freedom. I knew if my boss next to me was the kind of boss that would say, how dare you have that question, lowly enlisted man, then I would never have brought it up, right? But he was open. He knew the boss next to him was open, and vice versa. And I knew all of them too. And I knew I didn't know that was going to play out exactly like this, but the trust environment was there, that I knew that the general wasn't going to look down the line and say, who's this lowly enlisted person that had this question, right? So the curiosity from the leadership, and openness to those conversations. And what you described too with the TikTok and the Gen Z person, your company may, in that scenario, I could foresee a scenario where you just opened a new communications medium, a new platform of vetted information on that platform, right? That could expand to the adjacent possible. It's just coming up from curiosity. I agree 100%.
Well, I think really just to tie things back from our very first part of the conversation is the way that your dinner table conversation happened that night that you suggested the generator. How different. You would have talked about it if you would have said to the major, and he would have been like, are you kidding? Keep your mouth shut, sir, or son. I don't know, he probably wouldn't call you sir, right? And you would have said, and you likely would have said something at home with your family.
True.
Man, this guy, I shared an idea that was so obvious and he wouldn't do anything. But your dinner table conversation, because of what happened, was significantly improved. And what I think is really fascinating about that is that that's part of the, what could be possible if we enter into these spaces with an open hand, with how do we do this together? What does it look like for us to solve these problems together? When we are on the path for culture transformation, we know generally where we want to go, but how we're going to get there, you can't anticipate. No way. And so you open up from here to then moves to here and then moves to here. And that's what's that fun adjacent possible, is because we went down this path, we learned some different things about this group and how they operate, so that now we can solve a problem we didn't even know that we could put on our pathway forward. And if we're celebrating and inviting that, it's a very different dinner table conversation, and it has usually a lot more acceleration of innovation and ideas.
Sure is. Ooh, that was so much to unpack. Okay. Well, change the dinner table conversation. If you're out there, you're listening to this podcast, this video here, and you want to change the dinner table conversation for yourself, for your employees, for your culture, for your organization. If you want to, Heather has some very specific language that she likes to use regarding cultural transformation. So I'll let her say it. But if you want that, call Heather. What is that cultural statement that you like to say?
Yeah, the way that we talk about it is, if you're wanting to drive business operations through, I'm going to say it differently. If you want to accelerate culture by impacting business operations, those two things work together. And so how can we accelerate both is the thing that you're after. And I think most of the people that we're working with, they know that business operations are important. That's their number one. And they think culture is a piece of it. And so getting the acceleration of the two is where the magic happens.
The synthesis of the two, and I like that statement because it talks to both culture and business operations. If you're not thinking about the business operations, you can't. They tie in together. There's a synthesis. All right. Well, thank you for your time. Last words. What would you like the world to know about Talent Elevated?
Yeah, Talent Elevated is really about intentional steps forward. And so often that's what's difficult about that, is that you might not know where to step forward, or it's onerous to think about stepping forward on your own. So we would love to be able to be a partner and a guide with you to be able to really bring the culture that you're dreaming of, that drives your business forward, into a fruition and reality.
Awesome. Awesome. I will include the contact information, the website, all that good stuff in this and in the comments. And so thank you. Thanks for your time today. I really appreciate you being here and then having this conversation with me.
Thanks so much, Rob. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And we'll be out with that. I'll fade out there. Thank
Great.
you. Cool. Well, thanks
That's
for your
good.
time.
Thanks for the time. Yeah, I appreciate
ma'am.
this idea. I think it's going to be helpful as a generative approach to you. Hello.
That's my
To you
daughter.
reaching out for people. Yes.
Yeah, I agree. And so, yeah, we can chop this up into segments and then I can share this with the folks I was talking about yesterday. And
That'd be great.
awesome. Okay. Well,
Yay.
thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye, Rob.
No
Have a
problem.
good
I'll talk to you
evening.
soon. You too.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.